So now we have Luca Ferrarini, which is from the University of Pavia, and I know him, but I will not speak about him because I could not do about the other speakers, so it's fair, I guess. And he's talking about the Polyhedral approach to total coloring and total matching problem. So, Luca, you go to start.
Thank you very much. Yes, in this talk here, I will give this title here, Polyhedral approach to total coloring and total matching problem. So the outline is this one. First, we will see the total coloring problem with a polyhedral approach, and then an integer one, and then the total matching polytop, and then this one. So the total coloring problem is given a graph G with the vertex set V and edge set. Here we want to color all the elements of G in such a way that the incident element gets different color. In this setting here we have that our aim is to minimize the total number of color in this one. So here we have a third total coloring of a side color of length 5. So here we have a green, blue, and yellow here. So the notation is this one. Let G be a graph. So this one that I will call delta U is the set of edges incident to the vertex. U matching M is a subset of edges without no common vertices, and dually a stable set S is a subset of vertices such that they do not intersect each other in this graph here. Delta G is the maximum degree of a vertex in G, and a total matching T is a subset of independent elements of V union E. In this tiny graph here with vertices A, B, C, and D, with edges A, B, B, C, 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 A, B, and B, C, matching M is composed by these two edges here that are A, B, and D, S, C. That is a matching, and a total matching is composed by the vertices D and B and A and C for the edge itself. So total coloring is a mapping from all the elements of the graph G to a set of color 1 to K, such that we have to the vertices a proper vertex coloring, where we have to color only the vertices of the graph G in this graph here, and so that is a proper edge coloring for the edges of the graph G. And when we have an edge here to the vertex V itself, we have a different color. So here our aim is to minimize the total number of colors to have a proper total coloring. Here we have 4 valid proper total coloring of the Peterson graph, with every vertex as 3 incident edges to the vertex. Which is the smallest number K such that the G has a proper K total coloring is called the total chromatic number of a graph G, which is the smallest number K such that so G needs a valid K total coloring. A steadily lower bound is given by the maximum degree of vertex, that is delta, and so the lower bound of the total chromatic number of a graph G is delta plus 1. But which is an upper bound for this type of problem? It is conjectured by Besant and Weising that the total chromatic number lies between delta plus 1 and delta plus 2. Why is all here? We can pick a vertex of degree delta. We can color with delta color this here and one more color for the vertex V itself. And so here the delta is 5. Here we have a star 1, 5, so one vertex here and 5. Okay, yes, this one. And it is also proved that to compute the total chromatic number also for qubit graphs, where a qubit graph is a graph in which every vertex has 3 edges, is the art. First, we recall some basic facts about the polyhedral theory, so a polyhedral background here. Let A be a Hamiltonian rotational matrix with it is a rotational number. We can say that a polytope is a bounded polyhedron, and we can see that a polytope can be seen as a two equivalent way. The first one, given a bunch of points that are finite set of points, V1 to Vk, where we have the vertices of the polytope P, then P can be seen as the convex hull of the vertices V1 to Vk. And so the convex hull is the smallest convex set that contains the vertices here. So P can be seen as the representation for the first part. For the second part, a polytope P can be seen as the intersection of finitely many of spaces. And so here we have the page representation of a polytope P. If we want to optimize a linear function with a cost vector C, so that vector C, over the polytope P, where the continuous variable are x, then we have a linear programming problem for the first part. Instead, if we want to optimize a linear function with cost vector C and the variables is in Zn, then we have an integer programming problem. When we run a linear programming problem, we will run the well-known simplest method. And so the optimal value of a linear problem are the vertices of the polytope itself. So we can move from one vertex to another one for this path here until we have an optimal value here. And a key value here is that if we consider a subset of Zn f, and if we want to optimize a linear function over that set S, is the same to optimize that linear function on the convex set of that set here. So here we have the simplex method for this polytope here from one vertex to another one. Here we can see the facial structure of a polyhedron itself and facet. So let P be a non-empty polyhedron in Rn. We can say that an inequalities C transpose X is less or equal than delta is valid for the polyhedron P itself if every point in that polyhedron P satisfy that one. And so we can see also that a face of a polyhedron P is the set of points that are tight for that inequality, that is this one, that is valid for the polyhedron P itself. But we are very interested in a facet defining inequalities, since they are maximal facet. So a face is a maximal face if it does not contain any other proper face. And so the dimension of that face here is the dimension of the polytope minus 1. And the important theorem is that the facet of the polytope P represent a minimal system of the polytope P itself, in the sense that if we can drop any other inequalities of that polytope P, does not change the polytope P itself, and so we have a minimal system describing that polytope. Here we can now ready to state for the first assignment model here. So we introduce the binary variable x vk for every vertex v, y ek for every edge here and every color k, such that the capital K is the number of color 1 to delta plus 1, and we want to indicate which color is used in a graph G, so we introduce the binary variable zk for every color here. The constraints 2 and 3 ensure that for every vertex V and every edge here, they get assigned a one color. So the sum over each color for each vertex V is 1, and the same for each edge here, the sum is 1. For all the edges, the incident the vertex V and the vertex V itself can take different color, and the corresponding variable zk is set 1 if the color k is used by of each element for the vertex V and the edge itself. In a similar way, for every edge here with endpoints V and W, and for every color K, in the constraint 5, we have that for this element here, one of this element can take the color K, and so the corresponding variable that K is set to 1 if the color K is used by that edge of the vertices, and so at the 0, and the objective function 1, we want to minimize the total number of color in order to cover all the elements of the graph G. This model is very easy to write, but it suffers from symmetry issues, in the sense that any permutation of this color gave the same optimal value. Graphically, we can see that in this tiny graph here with 2 vertices and 1 edge, we have a valid free total coloring, blue, green, and red. We can group this element here into k colors, and we can permutate that color. So we can take 6, in this case here, 6 equivalent solution to this type of problem, where m is the number of edges of that graph, and n is the number of vertices of that. In order to overcome this problem here, we can consider a representative model for each color class. The key observation is that a total matching induces a color class, since the elements in the same color class form an independent set of elements. So we can consider with capital T the set of all maximal total matching. A total matching is said to be maximal if it is not contained in any other proper total matching. So we propose the set covering model written in the following way. We introduce the binary parameter lambda t for each total matching T on the maxima on the capital T. We can cover each vertex V and each edge V by at least one total matching. And the binary parameters AVT is set to 1 if the vertex V is contained in the total matching T and 0 otherwise, and the same meaning for every edge here. Bit is set 1 if the edge here is set in the total matching T and 0 otherwise. Our aim here is to minimize the total number of total matches in order to cover all the elements of G. But the number of constraints here is very large, and so we want to have a column generation algorithm in the sense that we can add columns, so new variables to this type of problem once a time. So we can consider a subset of feasible values of this total matching that gives us a feasible starting point from that model. A valid lower bound for the set covering model is writing down the dual of that final problem. So the dual is to maximize the total number of weights on the vertices of the graph G, the edges of the graph G, and so such that the sum of the weights of the vertices and the edges of that graph in each total matching T is not greater than 1. And these are non weights here. And this lower bound here tells us that the LP relaxation of the set covering model is not as a lower bound delta plus 1. Since pick a vertex of maximum degree delta with delta is k, the vertices that are incident to V we will call V1 to Vk, and delta V the edges are A1 to Ak. We can set the first total matching T0 composed by the vertex V itself, and we can construct a new different total matchings Ti that are V1 to that here, and this one to that one, and we can set the weights in the following form. We can set 1 for the vertex V itself and 1/2 for the other weights here, and summing up all these dual values here, we can take delta plus 1. We can then compare the LP relaxation of the assignment model to the set covering model. In this tiny graph here, the optimal value is 4, since we have delta plus 2, but the set covering model gives us a stronger LP lower bound, since the optimal value of the set covering model is 10 quotient 3. Instead, in the integer plane model is 3. So since the number of variables is very huge in that type of model, we can set a column generation. So we have variables once a time in order to improve our current solution here. So the approach is this one. First, we consider the LP relaxation of the lambda binary variable lambda t that become continuous in this setting here. First, we have a starting point from our subset of total matchings T1 by a greedy algorithms here that gives us the restricted master problem that we will call the R-happy problem. We can get the optimal value of that problem here. How can we add new variables at this problem? We have to look to the pricing problem, where a violated dual constraint corresponds to have for a variable outside for a current LP problem. If such a variable exists, we can go to the step 3, and this one, if we have that optimal value, is the optimal value of that problem. So, given an optimal dual solution of the restricted LP problem, we have to find if there exists a total matching, a maximal total matching T, such that we have a violated dual constraint in that model. So the sum over that total matching T of the edges of that total matching here plus the sum of the weights on the vertices is greater than 1. Since we want to find the most violated constraint here, we have to find the minimum of that quantity here. That is called the negative reduced cost of that quantity. So the pricing subproblem in this case consists of solving a maximum weighted total matching problem. Whenever tau is greater than 1, then we have the optimal value where we have to add a new total matching in that problem. And that are valid inequalities to the total matching polytope, since we can take for all the edges to the vertex V one of the elements, and for every edge here with endpoints V and W, we can take at most one of the elements. So we want to study the feasible region of this polytope here that we will call the total matching polytope. The total matching polytope is seen as the convex hull of characteristic vector of all the total matchings of T. So the total matching polytope has this inequality here, and we can prove that these inequalities are always faceted defining for the total matching polytope itself. But since we do not have a full linear hull of the total matching polytope, since we can take, for instance, this tiny graph here with this cycle of length 5, the point in which every entry has 1 over 3 is a point in the total matching polytope for that cycle, but it is a vertex of that cycle. And so we can cut out this point in order to find a new linear inequality in the total matching polytope. So if we consider an induced cycle, where in induced cycle we have no chords between two pairs of vertices, so let's treat KB an induced cycle. If the cardinality of that cycle is 1 or 2 modulo 3, then the congruent 2K free cycle that are written in the following form with floor 2K over 3 is always fast defining for the total matching polytope for the cycle itself. A natural question is this one: under which condition the congruent 2K free cycle are always facet for every graph G? We can prove that if K is 4, they are always facet defining for the total graph G. Since we do not have a full list of facet for the total matching polytope, and the number of constraints can be very large, in this setting here we can want to apply a cutting plane method to solving the maximum weighted total matching. Consider the convex hull given by this green polygon here, by these 4 integer 4 points that are green, yes, and the relaxation of that integer hull, that is the blue polygon here. If we want to optimize a linear function over that green polygon here, we can have that optimal value, that is the z up here, this one. And so in this cycle here, first we can consider a linear relaxation of the optimizing that linear function of that green polygon here, and we can run a linear problem to get the optimal value z and p in the blue one. The main point of the cutting plane is to cut out that point that are fractional point that does not belong to that convex hull, in order to find new cut in each step. So the optimal value for the first step is that vertex, the next one, the next hyperplane is that vertex, the third one is that one. We repeat this process here until we hit that vertex in the green part. So the following scheme for the cutting plane method is that one. We have an integer model for the cost vector C, where the variable is in a subset S of the subset of Z. Then first we can consider the linear relaxation of that problem, so the variable x becomes continuous in our settings, so we drop the integrality constraint of that model. Here we have a valid upper bound for the ZIP, and the cutting plane scheme is as follows. First, we solve the linear problem to that model. We can get the optimal value that we can call this value here. We can set the first polytope that is the relaxed polytope of the first step. We repeat this process until that optimal value stays in S. So we want to find an hyperplane that separates that point from S. We can update the new polytope with a new cut to the LP problem, and so we can solve this new LP problem with a new cut until we can reach the optimal value. So natural question is one also. How to generate effective cuts? The main point is that in proving this one, we have that facets have a great impact in the cutting plane generation. So which is the separation problem of the 2K3 cycle? A more formal problem for the separation problem is this one. So given a point, we want to decide if that point belongs to the polytope P itself, or we want to find a violate the linear inequality written in that form. In this case here, the separation of the 2K3 cycle is written in the following form. We want to find the most violated cycle where the cost vector CV star and YE star are the optimal of the LP current problem. And since we want to find the most violated 2K3 cycle, we want to maximize the difference between the left-hand side and the right-hand side that is written in that form. Whenever the alpha part is greater than 0, then we have found a violated 2K3 cycle. And since we have a floor in that one, we want to split out in two parts, since K can be written as 3Z plus T, where T is an integer value in the set 1, 2. And so the floor one can be seen in the following form: 2Z plus T minus 1. And so we get that. We can solve the separation problem of the 2K3 cycle as a network flow model. Since we want to find the most violated 2K3 cycle, the constraint 27 says that we have a disjoint union of cycle whenever the variable xv, where xv is the vertex variable for every vertex v, and we have a binary variable for every edge here. If the corresponding variable is set to 1, then the point is contained in that cycle, and so the sum is 2. Since we have a network flow model, this network here has arcs in both direction I and j and I, and when we pass through a vertex, we spend a unit of flow, and in the constraint 29, we have the flow conservation at each node I. Since when we spend a unit of flow, the corresponding variable xi for the vertex v is set to 1 if the corresponding vertex v is contained in that cycle. Since we do not know the source of this network flow model, the constraint 30 imposes that for each vertex we have at most one source node that introduces all the flow. The flow variable for the source node for every vertex I is the ui. For the source node, we have the first vertex and every vertex that are in the cycle are the sink of that cycle, and the capacity constraint is written in the constraint 32, and the cardinality constraint is written in the constraint 28, and so we have this problem. The optimal value of this maximization problem is the most violated 2K cycle. And so now we have to study the facial structure of the total matching point. So a complete graph is a graph in which every pair of for every pair of vertices we have an edge. So here we have a complete graph on 6 vertices that we will call the K6 one. We have proved this theorem here, so let G be a graph and KH is a complete induced subgraph of G, where H is an even number. Then the even clique that are complete graphs in this way can be seen as this valid inequality here are always fast defined for the total matching point itself. We have a sketch of proof. Then for the first part, we can see that the even clique is fast when G is itself the complete graph. So by contradiction, we can say that the phase induced by the even clique is contained in the phase of another one, and so we can prove that the phase f prime is a scalar multiple of the even clique one. A key observation is this graphically this one. An even clique can be seen as a disjoint union of perfect matching, since KH can be seen as this union here, where a perfect matching touches all the vertices of that graph here. Then, if we switch or swap one of each, so fix a perfect matching MJ with J that is in that disjoint union here with endpoints U and V, we can swap that edge with one of its endpoints, and so we can build a new total, two new total matchings TU and TV. And since the cardinality of that total matching does not change, we have that are contained in the phase F. So the cost vector of these endpoints here and the edge itself are the same. And since we can consider only perfect matching that touch all the vertices, we have that all the cost coefficient for that graph here are the same. Here we have graphically a decomposition of an even clique, where K is 6 is that complete graph with six vertices, and so we have here a decomposition with 5 perfect matchings of 6. We have so to cover all the other elements that are not in the even click. So fix that even click, we can fix a perfect matching ham, and we have to construct a new total matching such that the corresponding characteristic vector are contained in the face F. So fixing the perfect matching ham, we can consider an element that does not belong to that even click, and so we can set up a new total matching for every point A that does not belong to the even click in the following way. TA is composed by the perfect matching itself by the new element A, and so since the cardinality of the total matching does not change, the characteristic vector of that total matching for every A for that one belongs to the face F. And here we have the main method here. We can fix the following perfect matching with endpoints U and V, and we can swap as the previous case that edge here with one of its endpoints U and V. And so we can set up a new total matching build up in the following form. We can color this one, and so since the matrix having as column the characteristic vector of that incident vectors as full rank, the corresponding points are finally independent, and so this one is always passed for the total matching polytope itself. We have proved also that if we have a maximal click that is a click that is not contained in any other proper click, then the click on the vertices are always fast defining also for the total matching polytope of the graph G, which is the main difference between the even click and odd click. The key point is that the odd click are not fast for the total matching polytope, and this inequality here is a valid inequality for the total matching polytope, since we can pick at most the cardinality of a perfect matching. We consider this graph here, that is the complete graph on 5 vertices. We can pick the cardinality of a perfect matching that is 2, and plus the left out vertex in 3. In the following form, the odd click also can be seen the sum of 2 parts: the click on the vertices that are in the previous slide, and the blossom inequalities that are a subset of the edges of odd order, and so we have this inequality here. If we add a new central vertex to the odd click one, we can obtain an even click, and so every visible value for the odd click one stays for the even click, and so the even click dominates the odd click inequality. Finally, we can see our computational test based on each parameter here, on the number of nodes, of the number of edges, the maximum delta, and the optimal value, and we can compare the LP relaxation of the set covering model with a column generation iter in that column here. We can see by this table here that the set covering model, the LP set covering model, is much stronger than LP model, since the gap between the set covering model of the LP relaxation has a much closer cap than the LP model. And so we have that the optimal value here for cubic graphs is this way is greater than 4, and the optimal value is 5. We can run several tests on the separation of the even clicks, where the LP cut is the optimal value after the generation of what cut. We can see as the density of the graph grows, when then we have that the even click performs very well in graphs where we have a small with a big number of vertices and big number of lattices, and the gap is much smaller for the optimal value of the LP cut and the IP in this graph here for the Queen 6 and the gene graph. The same one we can run a cutting plane generation for the separation of the 2K free cycle. We can compare also in this case the LP cut and the optimal value. This behavior here is performing well for a smaller graph where the density is very small, but for a larger value of this graph here, we have that we can set up many cuts, but the gap between the LP cut and the optimal value is far. Here we have the joint separation problem for the click and for the 2K free cycle. As the density grows in this table here, we can see that the even click perform very well for the density much. And so for this final part, we want to give a complete linear description of the total matching polytope for our well-known classes of this type of graphs, bipartite graphs that are well-known, line graphs, and then the quasi-line graphs. Thank you very much for your attention.
And Laura has a question. Okay, we have
do you think that these results are also valid for random graph at the frame?
For random graph, for the density, yes, but for the total matching polytope, for which types of graphs? For cubic graphs, for random graphs? Okay. Yes.